ask you to welcome him very warmly. Thank you very much.
Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
It's better without the... Okay. Also, one little correction. It's a beautiful thing for me to come to Italy and speak in English, because I taught in Cesena. My Italian is so-so. So this is a vacation for me. Very nice, thank you. Also, the word lezione in Italian, I think means lecture. It could mean lesson. This is neither a lecture nor a lesson. This is a discussion. And so, if at the end nobody asks any questions, it's a complete disaster. Okay? So even if you're shy, even if your English isn't perfect, I must have questions. Because, first of all, has anyone ever seen a floating pool?
No.
How many floating pools are there? Why is it floating? There are many questions that I'll answer in this talk. First, I will give you a little background about who I am, what I do, why I do it. I did come, and I have a photograph that I show in some of my presentations, of me as a 23-year-old sitting with Braghieri, Fabio Reinhardt, Aldo Rossi, a little group in Venice. And my hair was like this, and it was very black, and I looked very angelic, very sweet, very innocent. So that was in 1977. I had just finished my first year in architecture at the Institute for Architecture and Urban Studies. Does anybody know what the IAUS? It should be famous. Maybe it's more famous in New York. But it was begun by Peter Eisenman. You know who Peter Eisenman is?
Yeah.
Of course. Yes, the Chinese would know who Peter is. How about Kenneth Frampton? Mario Gondosonis, Diana Agreste, Todd Williams, Bernard Schumi. They were all part of this little institute, which, by the way, my institute is trying a little bit to be in the kind of family of that. And Aldo Rossi, during that year, 1976, came to New York for the first time to present his Galleria Tesa and the Cimitero in Modena. And Peter Eisenman pulled me aside. He didn't like me very much. I was doing my own thing, and I was not interested in his work, so he was not interested in me. He said, there's a man named Aldo Rossi who is the great Italian architect who's coming to give a lecture. You have to see his work. So eventually, I thought the work was incredible. I made friends with him. I pleaded with him, can I work for you? By the way, this is how people get jobs. You pray, you plead, you ask again and again. Can I come to Milano to work? Maybe, I don't know. But finally, I worked as a waiter in a restaurant. I made some money. And without him ever answering any letter, because I kept writing letters, can I come work for you? Do you have something for me? Then I would send my ambassador. I would send, Mario Gondosonis went over to, I said, so Mario, did he say I have a job? He said, not really. He said it was not true. So after a year of waiting and making a little money, I decided to go. The worst could happen, I go to Milano, I knock on his door, and he goes, no. And then I tour around Milano, and I come back home. That's not terrible. It could be worse. So I went over, I knocked on the door. I'm 23 years old. I don't speak Italian. He comes to the door. Allora, I'm Jonathan Kirschenfeld. I don't know if you remember, but a year ago, I remember, come in. So I sit down, And I go, what? I don't understand. If you remember, why didn't you answer any of my letters? Mario Gastones came over and asked, I didn't know if I should come. And he said, Jonathan, I received many letters from many people, many students, 10 and 10 every day, hundreds every year. I don't answer any letters. If you want to work for me, you come to Milan. And so in the end, he understood that if somebody really wanted to work for him, they would have the desire to go without any preconditions, without knowing anything for sure. So I worked there for a year, not very well. I knew nothing, but I did what I could do. Johnny Duguerre taught me how to do the spruce with the paint, for the trees. And eventually, I came back to New York. I went to architecture school. I studied also with Michael Graves at Princeton. So when it was time to start practice, I had a political interest and also my interest in urban things. And for me, the idea of the connection between the city and the building, and especially in Aldo's scientific autobiography and the architecture and the city, the relationship between making a project and understanding the city was very, very clear to me. Eventually, as the years went on, I started my own practice and chose projects that I thought I was interested in. I was not interested in working for rich people, although there's a lot of rich people in New York who have a stack of magazines like this of all the things that they want in their apartment. Is that a point?
Yeah.
But I was interested in the kind of projects that had a social quality. So at this point, even though it's a very small firm, and it is true that we don't do many, many projects, the luxury for me is to be able to choose which projects I do. I live very modestly. I don't have a big house. I don't have a car. I don't have a lot of things. But I realize that an architecture life is short, and if you're doing work that you don't like, you shouldn't be an architect. Period. You should never take work to make money. There are many other things to do to make money. Architecture, unless maybe it's different somewhere else, you make projects, you don't make money. The money comes if you make good projects. So today, I'm not going to show any of the social housing, which is what we do. And if you're interested, there's the website, kirscharch.com, KIRSCHARCH.com. You want to look at some of the other projects. I'm only showing one project, and the floating pool is again one of the things that we do because we love the project. The project took 7 years to complete. It's not such a big project, but there are many hills to climb, many obstacles to getting it done. And so today I'm simply going to give you a little background into how the floating pool came to be, and then I would like to really have back and forth as to the questions that you have. What's strange about the floating pool is that it came about through the death of another project, which sometimes is the way architecture works. Okay. this button.
Okay.
Thank you. So this is a floating theater that I had tried to make real during the 90s when there was another crisis. There's a crisis every 7 years, I think, more or less. And when there's a crisis, it's actually good in some ways, because it makes architects think more about what they want to do. When you have no clients, you have to do something that's yours. So I decided I wanted, when I was in school, by the way, is everybody here 21, 22, 23 years old, more or less? Yeah. Less? 24, good. So when I was your age, I was in school, and I made a wall, where the project was a theater, and most of my classmates did a theater typical with the seats on the floor and a stage. I did a theater which was a wall with little boxes, kind of like La Scala or any normal 19th century Italian theater. And there were 8 people that would sit in each of the boxes. This project was an idea of having a theater that moved from place to place in New York, because you know we're surrounded by a big body of water, the East River and the Hudson River. So I decided, because I had no work, that I would try by myself, without a client, to build this, to raise money to build this floating theater. And I got some people interested, and I had a lot of letters of support from various people. And ultimately, the project did not get funded, it didn't get built, and I put it away. 2 years later, I got a phone call from one of the people who had been a supporter of the floating theater, and she said, Jonathan, I very much liked your project for the floating theater, but I have my own dream. I want to build a floating swimming pool. I said, a floating swimming pool? Why? Well, the idea is to bring the pool to all the neighborhoods that don't have swimming pools, that don't have amenities, recreation, etc. Basically, poor communities in New York. And she explained that she had done her master's thesis on what were called floating baths, which I'll show you in a minute, which were, at the turn of the century in New York City, in the rivers were wooden pontoon structures with a void in the center and little changing rooms around them, and the void in the center was in the water. So you would change and then jump into the river, but because the river had very many currents and was very dangerous, you were protected from being pulled out on the currents by being inside this pool. So this was the idea of the theater. It didn't go anywhere, but this is one of those structures that this woman had studied. It's called the floating baths, 13 floating baths. And they traditionally were in all the areas near to the poor communities in New York City for children to learn how to swim, and also because they didn't have bathing facilities, meaning sanitary facilities. This was a good way for the children to bathe and to wash themselves, etc. So this was part of history. And when we began, the idea of the courtyard, the cortile, as a architectural space was very, very important to us. Many of the things that we do, if you look at the housing, are always organized around what we call a figural void. In Italian, vide figurale, figurato. So, meaning a space that's empty, that's made by the spaces, by the buildings around it. In other words, a figure that's made by the architecture that surrounds it. So a swimming pool, if you think about it, is simply a big tub filled with water. But for us to make a public space, a public architecture for New York City children, we used the courtyard to begin forming this idea of how to make a swimming pool that was a social space, not just a place to jump in and get cool. In the end, and can everybody see more or less? It's not so great, but not bad. In the end, there's the pool, but the space is really that. And so you'll see as we built it that you come in on a porch, you come into a courtyard, and then the rest of the activity is approached via these ramps from the deck, from the courtyard up here down to the pool. So in terms of the plan, you come in on a gangway. What is the Italian for gangway?
Passerella.
Passerella. But this is 30 meters long. So it's very, very long. You come from the shore, you go across these very long bridges into the porch, into the reception area here. This is the courtyard that has a little spray pool for children. This is the very important snack bar where you buy your little panino. And you sit here already 4 feet above the level of the pool, so that the parents can come and have lunch and sit on this deck without going down to the pool to their children. So they can watch from here their children playing in the pool. In order to get to the pool, you go into one of the 2 changing rooms. There are the little lockers over here. And then you take that ramp down 4 feet from 0 to -4, and then you get to that level. So with a very small sectional difference, the difference between the height of the courtyard, which is open to the view, and the level of the pool, this is a very simple architecture. But that one move of changing the section was enough to provide a kind of quality to the space that I think is successful. Here you'll see the stages of the pool. We took an old barge, Chiatta, that used to be in Louisiana, that used to work up and down the Mississippi River. We then added the little columns, then we added the little cabanas, and then we added. So this is the 4 kind of stages in terms of the architecture of how the pool was made. This is the section. So again, you enter here on the porch, you go up 2 steps to the dining pavilion, and then this is the section, the level of the pool, and again, the level of the bottom of it. So this is the image of the pool. It remained this way for the first 3 years. We had to raise money. By the way, this is done by a philanthropist. This woman raised $5 million to build this pool. But it took a very long time. It was after 9/11, after the dot-com bust. It was very, very difficult. So for 3 years, we would go to meetings of communities where we were thinking the pool would be, and we would show this image, and people would go, "Oh, that's very nice, but you will never build this pool. It's too difficult. The permitting permitting process is too hard, and it's a dream. You could never build this. And so we started to believe that with all the obstacles in our way, that it was going to take a long time. In fact, it did take a long time. But finally, in the 4th year, we raised half the money, and with some of that money, we bought this barge. This barge was already decommissioned. In other words, it could not really work like an old barge. And it was 90 meters long by 25 meters wide. That's like half of a football field. It was huge. Very rusty, it required a lot of work. But eventually, we started working. And obviously, the first thing you have to do is cut a hole in the barge in order for the pool to exist. So you can see here, the structure of the barge is just a series of trusses. So we had to cut the truss, we had to reinforce the truss, and then in fact we saved the skin of the barge that we cut, and we dropped it down, and that became the floor of the pool. And what's interesting about the barges in this area is that there were, when they would take grain or sand or pebbles up and down the Mississippi, they would always weld a little piece of metal onto the deck in order to hold the tarp that protected the sand, etc., etc. So in a beautiful way, right now, when you swim in this pool, you can see on the very floor that you're standing on all the memories of 40 years of this barge being taken up with the little pieces. We've ground them down, they're very smooth now. But it's almost like hieroglyphics. Hieroglyphics of the history of all the trips that this barge made up and down. You can also see buried right here is one of the workers taking in the sun, one in between. So he was really the first patron to use this as what would be. If it was a little darker, you would see these are the little cabanas. This looks very much like Rimini. This is a little memory of Fellini and Aldo Rossi. And so in each of this is where the lockers for the clothes are, for example. This is the snack bar. We made a little skylight like these. And so even though the rain won't come in because we have covered them up above with a canopy, the light bounces on the underside of the metal roof and goes down, so that when you're in the pool areas themselves, it's very bright. Another image. And now, from Louisiana, where we did all the work on this barge, because we worked in a shipyard. This was not done in a cantier. This was done in a shipyard using ship technology. Meaning, when we're architects in New York and anyone says we want to make something out of steel, we go, whoa, no, absolutely, it's too expensive. We can never do it out of steel. You have to do it out of sheetrock or mattoni or something else. In the shipyard, the cheapest material and the cheapest technique was steel. And when we went out and asked the various shipyards, how much will it cost, we realized that we knew nothing about the technique of how to build something in a shipyard. We knew about how to build a building in the urban fabric, but nothing about ship technology. So a lot of the process of learning how to make this into an affordable project and not to have to raise more money was to understand how the shipyard worked and what they thought was easier to do as opposed to what we thought. So there was a lot of exchange of ideas between the architects in New York and the shipyard in Louisiana. So this is, everybody stood on the dock and said goodbye. And finally we were moving the pool from Louisiana all the way to New York with a tugboat. What's the Italian for tugboat? Uno che tira. Right. So this took 10 days. If you know Louisiana, you have to go around Florida and come all the way up to New York. So it took 10 days to get the pool to New York. And here it is finally coming underneath the Verrazano Bridge, which leads to Staten Island. And then I'll give a special prize if someone tells me what bridge that is. One Negroni after class. The most famous bridge in New York. Huh? Brooklyn, you get the Negroni. Okay, so it's coming under the Brooklyn Bridge. And here it is. This is Manhattan. We put it in Brooklyn, in what is now called Brooklyn Bridge Park. It's a brand new park, an urban park along the waterfront of Brooklyn that is spectacular. You should look that up on your website, Brooklyn Bridge Park. It's now one of the most popular waterfront parks in New York. Just now, half of it is finished and half of it will be finished. So there's the tugboat, one there, pushing it in place. You can see the roof, the canopy over the little cabanas. And by the way, when we moved it from Louisiana to New York, there was a big storm near North Carolina. And when it arrived in New York, it arrived full of water, which was very interesting because we'd never seen it full of water. So there it is finally. These are the gangways, 30 meters long. So you come up the gangway and then you can see the space here between the roof and the little skylights that we put there. So the light bounces off there and down into the skylights below. Anyone know what that is? Statue of Liberty. So it's very beautiful because New York Harbor is filled with boats and ferries, sailboats, and it's a very active harbor. So when you're swimming in the pool, you're also seeing the action of the city behind you and the life on the water in front of you. You can also see all those people are waiting an hour to go onto the pool. So there were so many people who wanted to swim that there were 4 sessions every day. People would wait, you could swim for 2 hours, then everybody was pushed off, and then another group came. It is now in New York the single most popular swimming pool, because now it's a public pool, open to everybody, you pay nothing to go. It's the most, of all the 53 public pools, it's the most popular. So, this is that little area for the children with the spray. See that? Snack bar. So you sit here, the tables for lunch are here, and you can watch over the rail of people swimming. This is the changing room. And again, it's hard to see. But this is made of a very interesting material that you can also see we used in a building on the website called the Dominage. It is a fiberglass sandwich panel that allows light to penetrate. So there's insulation on the inside of the panel, 2 faces of fiberglass, and here you can barely see it, but we have every fish that used to be alive in the Hudson River and in the East River that are no longer alive because it's completely polluted. one of the reasons we thought this was important is we want the children who come and change to first understand the history of New York and the waterfront and the waterways and the marine life, and to become politically active to push New York to clean the water so that one day, like 100 years ago, children can swim in the river, not have to swim in a pool that is chlorinated and clean. And that ultimately is the idea of the big living room, you know, the public space of New York for children, with the background of New York. These are two little shady pavilions, and a huge checkerboard pattern of gray and white, architecturally making it very active, and it's already a very active scene. A couple details. This is a bench. In order to pay for the pool, we had donors give extra money to have a dedication to them. And this says, from Lawrence Ween, who as a youth swam in the waters of Brooklyn. So we had someone whose family remembered swimming in the water in Brooklyn when it was clean 100 years ago. So this is again part of the history of letting people understand that New York once was a city where you could swim in all the water around, and that it needs to become that city again. Just to let you know, again, we test our ideas against a metric of being the simplest thing possible. We also had no budget. This was, $5 million sounds like a lot, but $1 million was for insurance and for costs of lawyers, et cetera, et cetera. We actually built the pool for $3 million. The cost of the barge itself was already $500,000. So we had a very, very little budget to work with to do a pool, all the machinery, all the filters, all the pumps. And so something like the wrapping of the exterior of these cabanas was done with concrete board, the cheapest material possible. But in order to make our sign, for example, boys, girls, snack bar, reception, we didn't put something on the boards. We removed the boards with water jet or sandblasting, where we literally carved away. We subtracted from the boards to make the lettering. So again, everything about the pool, we subtracted to make the pool, we subtracted to make the letters. There's obviously a play between the space between the cladding and allowing the air to flow around it. So in any case, a very simple idea about adding and subtracting. This pool was very popular at night because in New York, in the summer, it's hot during the day, but it's also very, very hot at night because all the buildings retain the heat and give it off at night. So at night, the pool is completely lit, and New York City is an amazing sight at night. And this is July 4th, when the fireworks in New York were all lit up. And I'm showing this slide because now that the pool is a great success, and we're working on a second pool now, because the pool was so successful it went up to the Bronx, and now it's in the Bronx, and it will return to the Bronx, because the Bronx is a place that is much more in need than the middle of Brooklyn. Brooklyn is by now a very fancy community, but in the Bronx they're suffering still. But given that the pool is there, we're working on a second pool, the idea that to begin with a floating theater and then to build a floating pool. My dream is to come back and build the floating theater again. And so this is just an image of Bruce Lee. Anyone know Bruce Lee? And this the structure of the theater built underneath the Brooklyn Bridge. And to end the talk, I'm going to show, someone's going to help me, show a little animation of the idea of building this theater, perhaps no.
Sotto.
Again, I don't know if you can see it well, but